I wasn't really paying attention when she first knocked on my door. I thought it was another delivery mix-up, someone's takeout, maybe. But when I opened it, there she was. My landlady. She leaned against the doorframe like she'd been standing there a while, holding a small tool kit against her hip. Her hair was pulled back, not neat, just practical, and she looked like she'd already fixed 3 other things that morning. "Sink leaking?" she asked. No introduction, no smile, just straight to the point. "Oh yeah? Sorry, I meant to call." She nodded, brushing past me, already reaching for the faucet. I stepped aside, useless, hands in my pockets. She knelt to look under the cabinet, the faint scent of soap and coffee clinging to her. I found myself watching her hands, small, efficient movements, tightening the wrench like she'd done it 100 times. It felt strange, someone else in my space. The quiet I'd been living with had been steady, almost comforting, but it shifted the moment she walked in. "You just moved in last week?" she asked from under the sink. "Yeah, still unpacking." "MHM." The pipe clinked as she turned it. "You'll get there." That was it. No small talk, no questions about work or family. Just the kind of answer someone gives when they don't expect to be remembered. I sat on the edge of the counter, watching her. She didn't fill silence with words the way most people do. She let it stretch, like she trusted it. I caught myself staring too long at the line of her wrist as she tightened another bolt. My eyes flicked away when she straightened up. "There," she said, brushing her palms on her jeans. "Shouldn't drip anymore." I nodded. "Thanks. I owe you. You pay rent. That's enough." She set the wrench back in the kit. Then, almost as an afterthought, she looked at me properly for the first time. "You work nights?" "Sometimes." "What?" "You've got that tired look." Her tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind. I laughed, a little awkward. "Yeah, something like that." She gave a small nod, like she understood more than she let on. Then she closed the kit, stood, and the moment felt like it should have ended there. Just a repair, just another tenant. But I couldn't help it. "Do you always do the repairs yourself?" Her mouth tugged into something between a smile and a shrug. "Cheaper than calling someone." There was a pause, long enough for me to hear the ticking of the clock above the stove. She noticed it too, I think, because she shifted, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well," she said finally, stepping toward the door. "If it leaks again, just text me." I wanted to say something, thank her again, offer her coffee, anything to keep her in the room another minute. But the words stuck, heavy and clumsy, so I just nodded. She left with the same quiet she'd come in with, the door clicking softly shut. I stood there, staring at the fixed sink, listening to the faint sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. My phone buzzed a minute later. Unknown number. Just 3 words. "Next time, coffee." I read it twice, then a third time, my thumb hovering over the screen. The room felt different, like the silence had shifted shape. And that was the start of it. I didn't text her back right away. I must have stared at that message, "Next time, coffee," for 10 minutes before setting the phone face down on the counter. It wasn't just an invitation. It was the fact that she'd thought of me after leaving. That small, ordinary act carried more weight than it should have. The next morning, I left my apartment earlier than usual. When I passed her door, I caught the smell of tea steeping, faint and herbal. She opened it just as I walked by, like she'd been expecting me. "Morning," she said, casual, as though she hadn't changed the shape of my silence the night before. "Morning," I nodded, then, almost stupidly, added, "I was actually making coffee." Her eyes flicked to the mug in my hand. Instant. I laughed under my breath. "Yeah, cheapest one." She hesitated, then opened her door wider. "Come in. I'll show you what real coffee tastes like." Her apartment looked like mine, only lived in. Plants by the window, books stacked sideways on the shelf, a chipped mug drying by the sink. It felt warmer than mine, though less temporary. She poured from a French press, sliding the mug toward me. Our fingers almost brushed, but not quite. "You'll never go back to instant," she said, taking a sip from her own cup. "Guess I'm spoiled now." We sat at her small kitchen table. The silence wasn't heavy this time, more like a blanket. I caught myself studying the lines around her eyes, the way her thumbs circled the rim of her mug when she wasn't thinking. "You're young." she said suddenly, setting her cup down. What are you, 23? 24. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, almost like she'd expected less. Still, too young for well, too young for a lot of things. I didn't know how to answer that, so I just nodded, tracing the handle of my cup. She didn't look at me when she said it, but I felt the weight of her words anyway. I cleared my throat. What about you? You've been here a while. Almost 10 years. Her voice softened, just slightly. Bought the place after my divorce. It's easier looking after tenants than after someone who doesn't want to be here. Her fingers drummed lightly against the wood of the table. It wasn't a dramatic confession, but it carried something raw underneath. I wanted to ask more, but the quiet around her felt like something I wasn't supposed to disturb. Instead, I said, that must have been hard. She gave the smallest smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. You get used to it. Or you don't. Some days it's one, some days the other. The kettle whistled softly on the stove, though she hadn't turned it on. For a second, I imagined reaching across the table, covering her hand with mine. Instead, I stayed still, pressing my palm flat against my thigh, willing myself not to move. We talked a little more, about nothing, really. Work, the noisy neighbors, the plant she kept killing and buying again. Each detail felt like another thread pulling us closer, though neither of us said it out loud. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. I slipped my shoes on, fumbling a little, and she laughed under her breath. You're not used to being looked after, are you? She asked. I froze, caught off guard. Not really, no. There was a pause, one of those moments that feels longer than it is. Then, without much thought, she reached out and straightened the collar of my jacket. Just a quick tug, fingers brushing lightly against my neck. It shouldn't have meant anything. A simple gesture. But it did. It landed in my chest like a stone dropping into still water, sending out quiet ripples I couldn't stop. I met her eyes, and for a second, neither of us looked away. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. It was late when I heard the knock. Soft, almost hesitant. I opened the door, half expecting the sound to have been in my head, but she was there. Sorry, she said, shifting the weight of a grocery bag against her hip. The elevator's out again. Thought you might help me carry this up? I nodded too quickly, grabbing the second bag from her hand. Warm to the touch. She smelled faintly of rain and detergent. Her apartment was dim, one lamp on in the corner. I set the bag down, listening to the quiet tick of her clock. She bent to slip her shoes off, brushing damp hair from her face. Something about the simple, unguarded movement made me swallow hard. You didn't have to. I didn't mind, I said, cutting her off too fast. She looked at me for a beat longer than usual. We unpacked the groceries in silence. Or almost silence, just the rustle of paper, the soft clink of glass jars. Once, her hand brushed mine when we both reached for the same carton. She pulled back immediately, tucking her hair behind her ear, pretending it hadn't happened. I wanted to say something. Anything. But the words stayed caught in my throat. She cleared hers first. You're quiet tonight. I guess. I hesitated. Just long day. She didn't press. She never did. And maybe that's what made me want to fill the air. But then, footsteps in the hall. A voice calling, Mom? She froze. My stomach dropped. The door opened halfway before she moved to block it. A young woman, early 20s, sharp eyes, stood there. Oh, the girl said, gaze flicking between us. Didn't know you had company. Just a neighbor, she answered quickly. He was helping with groceries. Her daughter's eyes lingered on me, suspicious, unreadable. Then a small nod. Right. I'll be in my room. The door shut again, leaving the air heavier than before. She let out a breath she must have been holding. Sorry about that. I shook my head. No, it's fine. But it wasn't. Something about the way she had said neighbor. Too sharp. Too fast. I thought of leaving, giving her space, but she stepped closer. Close enough I could see the tiny flecks of color in her eyes. You should go, she said softly. But her hand stayed on the counter beside mine, not moving. I nodded, though my feet didn't. The silence stretched, unbearably thin. I imagined leaning forward, imagined the world tilting just enough that nothing would be the same after. My breath caught. So did hers. But then she stepped back. Just enough. Good night, she said. Her voice steady, her eyes anything but. I left before I could forget how to dot. It was late afternoon when I saw her outside, sitting on the front steps of the building. A paper cup in her hand. Not coffee this time. Tea, probably. She didn't notice me at first. Or maybe she did, and just didn't say anything. I hesitated before walking over, hands stuffed deep in my jacket pockets. Mind if I? She shifted, making space beside her. Go ahead. The concrete was cool through my jeans. We sat there, shoulder to shoulder, but not touching, watching the street. Cars rolled by, distant chatter from a couple walking their dog. Ordinary noises that somehow made the silence between us louder. Your daughter, I said quietly, surprising myself. She doesn't like me much. Her head tilted slightly, not quite facing me. She doesn't know you. She doesn't have to, I muttered. A pause. Then, she's protective. More of me than herself, I think. Her voice trailed off. She saw too much when she was younger. I didn't ask what she meant. The way she held her cup tighter told me she'd already said more than she planned. We stayed there, the breeze tugging at her hair. I wanted to say I understood, but the truth was I didn't. Not really. I was just pulled into the orbit of it, wanting to know more than I should. After a while, she said, You're not like the others. Others? Tenants. They come and go. They don't linger. She let out a breath, not quite a laugh. You linger. I smiled faintly, though my throat tightened. That a bad thing? Her eyes finally met mine. That depends. The words sat heavy between us. I thought about every near moment we'd had. The coffee, the brush of her hand, the collar she fixed. All the small things that had started to feel bigger than they should. And then it broke out of me, unpolished. I keep thinking about you. Her gaze didn't waver, but her fingers pressed hard into the cup, bending the paper slightly. You shouldn't, she said softly. I know. You're too young. I know. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't move away. If anything, she leaned the tiniest bit closer, enough that I caught the warmth of her sleeve against mine. I don't want to mess this up, she whispered. I've already. She stopped, pressing her lips together. I waited, heart pounding, though the world outside stayed calm. A car door slammed down the street. A child laughed somewhere out of sight. All these everyday sounds, while something inside me leaned forward, dangerously. You don't want what I have, she said finally. The years. The wait. I swallowed. You don't know that. She shook her head, but there was no conviction in it. Her eyes glistened faintly, though she blinked it away before it could fall. You should find someone else, she murmured. I don't want someone else. The words slipped out, softer than I meant them, almost carried by the air. Her breath hitched. Just once. She didn't reply. We sat there, neither moving, both of us trapped in the space between what we wanted and what we feared. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. She shivered slightly, rubbing her arms, and without thinking, I moved as if to drape my jacket over her shoulders. My hand froze halfway, suspended in that fragile distance. She looked at it, then at me. The pause stretched. My chest ached with it. Her lips parted, not a word, just breath. And in that silence, the question hung unspoken. Are we really going to do this? The next morning, I didn't see her. Or the one after. Usually, there was some small trace. A door opening as I left, the sound of her kettle whistling through the thin wall, her shadow in the hallway light. But for 3 days, nothing. I tried not to notice. Tried to keep busy, to convince myself she was just occupied. Tenants, errands, her own life. But the silence pressed indifferently now, heavier, like I'd said too much on those steps. On the 4th day, I finally caught sight of her. She was outside by her car, loading groceries. Her movements were brisk, purposeful, as though every gesture had been practiced to avoid hesitation. Hey, I said, stepping closer. She glanced up, forced a small smile. Hi. That was it. Just hi. I offered to help, but she shook her head, already closing the trunk. Got it. There was no lingering this time. No pause to fill. She got in the car and drove away, leaving me with the faint smell of oranges from the bag she'd carried. That night, I sat at my table, staring at my phone. I typed out a message. Did I say something wrong? but deleted it before sending. Typed again, coffee tomorrow, and deleted that too. The screen stayed blank, accusing. The fifth day, her daughter knocked on my door. I opened it, surprised. She asked me to give you this. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a note, written quickly, almost too neatly. Busy this week. Please don't wait on me. No explanation. No warmth. Just distance, folded on a page. I wanted to believe it was true, that she was simply busy. But the words felt like a wall, one she'd built in a hurry. I thought of knocking on her door, demanding the truth. But the memory of her eyes that night on the steps, raw, unguarded, stopped me. Maybe she regretted it. Maybe she couldn't risk being seen like that again. Still, I caught myself waiting. Sitting by the window longer than I should, watching the hallway when I heard footsteps, listening for her kettle. The waiting became its own kind of routine, quieter than loneliness, sharper than longing. One evening, I came home to find a car parked out front. A man stepped out, tall, older, carrying himself like someone who belonged. He rang her bell. She opened the door almost instantly. I froze, half hidden by the stairwell. I couldn't hear what they said, only saw the way her shoulders softened when she looked at him. Not like with me. Different. He stepped inside. The door closed. My stomach tightened, though I couldn't name the feeling. Not heartbreak, not exactly. Just stalled. Like everything between us had been suspended mid-breath. I went back to my apartment, shut the door too hard. The walls felt closer than ever. I sat with my phone again, thumb hovering over her name in my contacts. A dozen messages wrote themselves in my head, questions, accusations, confessions. None of them made it onto the screen. In the end, I just set the phone face down, the same way I had that very first night. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence that I hadn't planned to knock. I told myself I was just passing by, just heading out for groceries I didn't need. But my hand rose anyway, 3 soft taps against her door. It opened after a pause. She stood there, hair loose, sweater slipping at the shoulder like she'd been home all day. Her eyes flicked to me, then past me, as if she'd hoped it was someone else. I saw you with him, I said before I could stop myself. The words sounded smaller than they had in my head. Her lips pressed together. That was my ex-husband. Oh, the word landed flat. You didn't think it mattered, she finished for me. Her voice wasn't sharp, just tired. We stood in the doorway, the hall light humming above us. I should have left then, but my feet wouldn't move. I don't know what we're doing, I admitted. Her eyes finally met mine. Neither do I. Something broke open in the silence that followed. She stepped back, just enough for me to enter. I did, careful, like the floor might give out beneath us. The kitchen smelled faintly of tea and lemons. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, while I stood across from her. You're too young for this, she said, softer now. And you're too. I stopped, shaking my head. No, that's not fair. Her mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost a wound. You don't see it. The years. The pieces I don't talk about. Maybe not. But I see you. My voice cracked slightly, but I didn't look away. Her arms loosened, dropping to her sides. She exhaled, slow, like she'd been holding her breath for months. You remind me, she whispered, what it felt like to be wanted. Before it got complicated, the words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were romantic, because they weren't. They were raw, plain, almost broken. I took a step closer, close enough to see the faint tremor in her hands resting on the counter. I don't want to make this harder for you, I said. You already have. But there was no blame in it. Just truth. We stood there, suspended in the kitchen light, the world narrowed down to a breath. I could feel the choice pulsing between us. Lean in or step back. Speak or stay silent. Her hand twitched against the counter, fingers curling as though reaching for something invisible. If I let this happen, she murmured, not finishing. I swallowed, my chest tight. Then it happens. Her eyes searched mine, like she wanted me to carry the weight of her fear with her. I didn't move closer, didn't touch her, just stayed there, steady. The clock ticked on the wall. A car passed outside. The ordinary world kept moving while ours held still. Then, quietly, she said, I'm scared. I nodded. Me too. The space between us shifted. She didn't step into it, and neither did I. But her hand lifted, hesitant, almost reluctant, and rested against my wrist. Just that. Warmth through fabric, light but grounding. We both breathed in at the same time. She looked at me then, really looked, and for once there was no shield in her eyes. "Okay," she whispered. It wasn't permission. It wasn't surrender. It was just a fragile, human acceptance. And somehow, that was enough that it didn't change overnight. Nothing dramatic happened after that, okay. No sudden confessions, no sweeping gestures. Just slower mornings, longer pauses, a soft shift I could feel even when nothing was said. She still made her tea at exactly 8:47 a.m. I still brewed my cheap instant coffee, though sometimes I'd bring my mug to her kitchen instead, and she'd slide the French press toward me with a quiet smirk. "Spoiled now," she'd remind me. We didn't talk about what we were. We didn't need to. It showed up in smaller ways. Her daughter coming home late to find us sitting on the bench outside, not touching, just talking. The way she didn't flinch when she saw us anymore. A kind of acceptance that took time to settle. Some nights, I'd hear her knock on my door, carrying leftovers in a container. "Too much for me," she'd say, though I knew she'd made extra on purpose. Other nights, I'd help her fix a cabinet or change a bulb, our arms brushing in the narrow hallway, the silence between us easier now. One Sunday, we walked to the park down the street. She chose a bench, and I realized it was the same kind we'd sat on outside the building that night, the one where everything almost tipped over. We sat there quietly, letting the breeze carry bits of conversation from strangers passing by. "Feels different now," I said. "What does?" "This. Sitting here with you." She gave me a side glance, a small smile tugging at her mouth. "Less complicated?" "Not less. Just quieter." She nodded, looking ahead. Quiet can be good. There were moments, of course, when the doubt came back. I'd catch myself wondering what she saw when she looked at me. If she still thought of me as too young. If the gap between us would ever feel like more than just years. But then she'd reach over, touch my hand lightly while we walked, or lean against me when she was tired, and all those questions would soften. Not disappear, but soften enough to live with. Her ex stopped coming by. I never asked why, and she never offered. Some things belonged to her history, not ours. What mattered was the way she started leaving her door open when she cooked, the smell of garlic and herbs drifting into the hallway, an unspoken invitation. One morning, months later, I found myself at her table, sipping black coffee from the chipped mug I'd seen drying by her sink the very first time I stepped inside. She was across from me, folding a napkin absent-mindedly, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "I don't think I expected this," she said suddenly. "Expected what?" "This, to feel like living again." Her words trailed off, but the silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. I reached across, just enough to brush my fingers against hers. She didn't pull away. Life didn't get easier, not exactly. Work was still long. She still carried her years, her history, her quiet worries. But there was something steadier in the way we moved through it together. Less about answers, more about presence. I think about that first knock sometimes, the one with the toolbox, the leaking sink, the silence that followed her into my apartment. How ordinary it all seemed. How quickly it became something else. Now, when I hear the kettle whistle in her kitchen at 8:47, I pour my coffee, and we meet halfway. A ritual no one else would notice, but one that feels like ours alone. And maybe that's the point. Not grand declarations, not fireworks. Just a quiet, steady warmth that keeps unfolding, one small moment at a time. I looked at her across the table, her hand still near mine, and she gave me the smallest nod. A signal, a secret, a kind of answer. One only the two of us would ever understand.